January 17, 1942. A bitter winter grips the forests of Europe, frost clinging to the skeletal branches and frozen mud cracking beneath marching boots. Somewhere deep in a German command post, maps are spread across the table, candles flickering shadows over the faces of officers confident in their mastery of the continent. Victory seems inevitable. The Blitzkrieg had proven unstoppable. France had fallen, Britain battered, and the Eastern Front still holding. Yet across the Atlantic, an entirely different rhythm is taking shape. In the industrial heartlands of America, smoke rises from steel mills that never sleep. Factories hum with ceaseless motion, assembling tanks, planes, and weapons at a pace Germany cannot yet fathom. Young men and women in olive-drab uniforms practice maneuvers in endless drills, their eyes sharp, their resolve unbroken. On distant waters, fleets of transport ships prepare to carry these soldiers and machines into theaters of war the Nazis consider remote, insignificant, unprepared for the sheer scale of what America is building. The first whispers of doubt reach Berlin, but the commanders dismiss them. They cannot yet know that the day is approaching when they will learn a stark, unignorable truth. America was built different. Transition. To understand why Germany underestimated America, we must first look at the state of the world and the unfolding war that set the stage for this confrontation. By 1939, the world was already teetering on the brink of unprecedented conflict. Germany, under Adolf Hitler, had grown bold after the annexation of Austria in 1938 and the occupation of Czechoslovakia. The Blitzkrieg, a combination of rapid mechanized warfare, air superiority, and coordinated infantry, had redefined the face of modern combat. When September 1, 1939, brought the invasion of Poland, it seemed the war was only beginning, yet its trajectory was already terrifyingly clear. The Polish army was swiftly overwhelmed. German panzer divisions cut through defenses like a scythe through wheat. Air raids flattened cities. The world watched in stunned silence. By 1940, Germany's confidence soared. Denmark and Norway fell in April, securing critical northern ports and iron supplies. May brought the fall of the Low Countries and France itself. Paris, once the heart of European culture and resistance, succumbed in just 6 weeks. The German military appeared unstoppable. Hitler's generals, emboldened by victories and buoyed by the perceived inadequacy of their enemies, saw the war as theirs to command. Meanwhile, across the Channel, Britain braced itself. The Battle of Britain, from July to October 1940, tested German air supremacy. The Luftwaffe, despite its might, failed to break the Royal Air Force or demoralize the British population. Though victory in Western Europe had been swift, the skies above Britain revealed limits to German planning and adaptability. Amid this European turmoil, the United States watched from across the Atlantic. Initially committed to neutrality, the nation was deeply divided. Isolationists argued against involvement in foreign wars, while interventionists warned that a Nazi-dominated Europe would threaten global stability. Despite reluctance for direct engagement, the U.S. government began preparing for the inevitable. The Lend-Lease Act, passed in March 1941, allowed America to supply Britain and later the Soviet Union with vital equipment, fuel, and armaments. Factories shifted into wartime production, and the scale of industrial mobilization was staggering. Aircraft manufacturers churned out thousands of bombers and fighters. Tank assembly lines ran day and night. Shipyards built vessels that could carry men and machines across oceans. By the summer of 1941, Germany had turned its attention eastward, launching Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. Millions of soldiers, thousands of tanks, and aircraft poured across the vast Eastern Front. Early victories gave the Wehrmacht enormous confidence, yet the harsh Russian winter and the vastness of Soviet territory would test German assumptions. Meanwhile, American military advisors observed developments carefully. Reports from Britain and the Soviet Union painted a picture of German efficiency, but also revealed cracks in logistics, endurance, and adaptability that could be exploited. Germany's view of the United States remained skewed. Hitler and his generals assumed that the U.S., bogged down by internal politics and the legacy of the Great Depression, would be slow to mobilize and unprepared for large-scale mechanized war. Intelligence reports underestimated both the speed of American industrial capacity and the resolve of its population. Factories capable of producing thousands of tanks and planes per month were dismissed as mere potential. US soldiers, trained in routine drills, were seen as inexperienced and untested, yet their discipline and morale would soon be proven in ways that shocked German commanders. By December 7, 1941, the illusion of distance and neutrality ended. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor forced America directly into the global conflict. Overnight, the United States transformed from a wary observer to an active participant. Troop enlistment surged, and factories expanded production in a nationwide effort that few outside the country could comprehend. Ships, aircraft, and tanks rolled off assembly lines at scales Germany could not yet measure. By early 1942, the stage was set for a confrontation that would test every assumption the Nazis had made about their distant, seemingly hesitant adversary. The contrast was stark. Europe was exhausted, consumed by war, and dependent on stretched supply lines. Across the Atlantic, the US was building not just an army, but an unstoppable industrial machine. The Germans believed they understood the American way of war, but the reality, the scale, speed, and determination would soon become painfully clear. Transition. To grasp the full magnitude of this misjudgment, we must examine the next phase. How America, once drawn into the war, prepared to confront Germany with a force that combined technological innovation, human determination, and sheer industrial might. The attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, was a seismic shock to the world. Overnight, the United States shifted from cautious observer to full-fledged participant in a global conflict. President Franklin D. Roosevelt's declaration of war was resolute, his words echoing the unshakable resolve of a nation no longer able to stand idle. The shockwaves were felt not only across the Pacific, but in Berlin, where German strategists now faced the possibility of confronting a nation whose industrial and human resources dwarfed their own. American mobilization was unprecedented. Factories that had produced civilian goods pivoted to wartime manufacturing with astonishing speed. Steel plants that once produced automobiles now forged tanks, artillery, and warships. Aircraft production became a national obsession. Every month, hundreds of bombers and fighters left assembly lines, their numbers threatening to overwhelm Germany's European theater. Shipyards on both coasts churned out Liberty ships, designed to transport men and materiel across oceans under constant threat from U-boats. No European conflict had seen such an industrial response, and the scale alone began to redefine German expectations. On the human front, the US military rapidly expanded. Millions enlisted, their training intense, standardized, and relentless. Basic drills, marksmanship, and tactical exercises forged a disciplined force prepared to face battle-hardened enemies. Leadership emphasized adaptability, innovation, and initiative traits that contrasted sharply with the rigid command structures many German officers relied upon. Though inexperienced in combat, American soldiers brought a resilience and morale rooted in the conviction that they were fighting for survival, liberty, and the defense of a nation that had the means to support them indefinitely. The Germans, meanwhile, maintained a perspective shaped by prior victories. Blitzkrieg had worked in Europe because of speed, surprise, and concentrated force. They assumed that American forces would be slow, hesitant, and technologically inferior. Intelligence underestimated the capacity of American logistics, the rapidity of industrial expansion, and the ingenuity of engineers and scientists. By early 1942, German commanders were beginning to receive reports of American successes in North Africa and the Pacific, small, localized victories, but they misread these as isolated incidents rather than indicators of a systemic military powerhouse. Technological advancements further amplified the disparity. The US had invested heavily in mechanized warfare, producing tanks like the M4 Sherman that could be mass-produced and easily repaired. Aircraft such as the P-40 Warhawk and B-17 Flying Fortress exemplified American ingenuity in design and production efficiency. Innovations in radar, communications, and logistics allowed the US to coordinate complex operations across multiple theaters, a capability Germany struggled to match under wartime conditions. The combination of technological sophistication and industrial output created a force multiplier, one whose magnitude would soon be undeniable to German eyes. Even strategy and planning reflected the unique American approach. Unlike Germany, which often relied on rapid, high-risk maneuvers with limited long-term supply planning, the United States emphasized sustainability, coordination, and redundancy. Every unit, every convoy, every piece of equipment was supported by an extensive network of logistics, ensuring that even when setbacks occurred, operations could continue unabated. This systemic strength, mechanical, organizational, and human, was something Germany had rarely encountered. By the spring of 1942, the stage was set. The United States had transformed itself into a global war machine with speed, precision, and scale. Troops trained, tanks rolled off assembly lines, and planes filled the skies above training fields. Across the Atlantic, German intelligence struggled to grasp the magnitude of what was forming. Early encounters would shock them, revealing the limitations of their assumptions and the extraordinary capability of an opponent they had dismissed for too long. Transition, the clash was inevitable. To understand why Germany underestimated the United States and how America would exploit its advantages, we must examine multiple angles: the human, technological, tactical, and leadership dimensions that shaped this confrontation. Human angle. The human element of war is often overlooked in statistics and battle reports, yet it defines the outcome of conflict. American soldiers in 1942 were young, inexperienced, and facing an enemy hardened by years of European combat. Yet what they lacked in battlefield seasoning, they compensated for in resilience, adaptability, and morale. Training camps across the United States operated at an unprecedented scale. Drill instructors emphasized endurance, marksmanship, and the ability to think independently in combat, a stark contrast to the rigid hierarchy of the German army. Soldiers learned not only tactics, but the philosophy of sustained effort. Endless repetitions forged muscle memory, long marches tested stamina, simulated battlefield exercises built confidence. Officers encouraged initiative, understanding that no plan survives the first engagement unscathed. This emphasis on flexibility gave American forces an edge in unfamiliar theaters of war, from the jungles of the Pacific to the deserts of North Africa. The psychological dimension was equally crucial. Unlike European troops, who had endured constant bombardment and occupation, Americans entered battle with a sense of purpose, reinforced by national propaganda, community support, and the certainty of industrial backing. Letters home often reflected pride rather than fear, reinforcing morale across units. When U.S. forces first met German troops in combat, their cohesion and determination surprised the enemy, who had expected hesitant, inexperienced soldiers. The human factor, discipline, morale, and adaptability would prove to be one of the first lessons Germany would learn. America was not merely fighting, it was prepared to endure and outlast. Tactical angle. Tactically, Germany had perfected the Blitzkrieg, a system of concentrated armored thrusts, rapid infantry movement, and close air support that had dismantled Europe in mere weeks. Early American planning seemed rudimentary in comparison. Yet beneath the surface, U.S. commanders emphasized combined arms coordination and the integration of technology with battlefield strategy. Training exercises simulated the chaos of real combat, teaching units to respond dynamically to shifting conditions rather than rely solely on rigid directives. In North Africa and the Pacific, American tactics evolved quickly in response to the enemy. Artillery placements were calculated with precision, infantry maneuvers were flexible, and reconnaissance became an integral part of operational planning. Even when facing German panzer divisions, U.S. forces leveraged numerical strength, superior logistics, and air cover to offset the tactical experience gap. The result was a style of warfare that the Germans had not anticipated: resilient, methodical, and capable of absorbing initial shocks before counterattacking effectively. Tactical innovation extended beyond the battlefield. The U.S. Navy developed amphibious assault techniques, learning to transport and supply troops across hostile shores. Coordination between branches, Army, Navy, and Air Force ensured that American operations had depth, redundancy, and sustainability. Germany, accustomed to rapid, decisive strikes, underestimated the patience, planning, and adaptability of American forces, a miscalculation that would soon become painfully evident. Technological angle. Technology and production define the difference between American and German warfighting. While Germany relied on highly advanced but limited production lines, the U.S. mobilized factories capable of output on an industrial scale. Tanks like the M4 Sherman were mass-produced with interchangeable parts, making repairs in the field faster and simpler. Aircraft such as the B-17 Flying Fortress or the P-38 Lightning combined innovation with volume, saturating the skies with machines Germany struggled to counter. Naval technology, too, played a decisive role. Aircraft carriers, destroyers, and escort vessels were produced in numbers sufficient to challenge U-boat dominance in the Atlantic. Advanced communication systems allowed coordination across vast distances, while radar and early sonar systems gave American forces unprecedented situational awareness. The integration of technology into both planning and execution created a force multiplier, enabling numerically inferior or inexperienced troops to operate with efficiency and lethality. Germany's early intelligence underestimated this industrial and technological capacity. Reports of factories producing hundreds of aircraft per month were dismissed as exaggeration. Yet the reality, mounting fleets, armored divisions, and mechanized infantry, would soon confront German commanders with a harsh lesson. The United States was capable of reshaping the battlefield not through single tactical brilliance, but through the relentless application of industrial and technological power. Leadership angle. American leadership during this period emphasized pragmatism, adaptability, and coordination. Generals such as Dwight D. Eisenhower, George Marshall, and Douglas MacArthur prioritized preparation, logistics, and sustainable operations. Unlike German commanders who often relied on audacious maneuvers and personal intuition, American leaders built systems that minimized risk and maximized operational endurance. Decisions were data-driven, informed by intelligence, and coordinated across multiple theaters. The German command, confident in its superiority, viewed American leadership as inexperienced and overly cautious. Yet this caution was strategic. By ensuring supply lines, maintaining reserves, and anticipating enemy reactions, American commanders reduced vulnerabilities and maximized combat effectiveness. Their approach reflected not arrogance but calculation, an understanding that war was not a sprint, but a sustained effort requiring industrial, technological, and human alignment. This leadership style allowed the U.S. to project power globally. In Africa, Europe, and the Pacific, operations could be executed simultaneously without overextending forces. Decisions were decentralized enough to allow field commanders initiative, yet centralized enough to ensure unity of purpose. For Germany, encountering this combination of disciplined human resources, tactical ingenuity, technological output, and strategic foresight was both surprising and disorienting. A revelation that America's capacity to wage war extended far beyond what initial intelligence suggested. These angles, human, tactical, technological, and leadership, paint a picture of an adversary Germany had underestimated. To complete the portrait, we must examine additional perspectives: the German reaction, psychological impact, and the moral dimension of this confrontation. Enemy perspective, German shock and misjudgment. By mid-1942, German intelligence had begun to confront an uncomfortable reality. The Americans were not what they had expected. Early reports from North Africa, where U.S. forces had landed in Operation Torch, described disciplined troops executing complex maneuvers, supported by tanks, artillery, and coordinated air power. Commanders in Berlin were forced to reconcile this with their assumptions that American forces would be slow, inexperienced, and prone to collapse under pressure. The initial shock came not just from combat effectiveness, but from scale. The Germans observed the rapid buildup of U.S. divisions, the relentless output of tanks and planes, and the sheer logistical sophistication enabling operations across continents. Frontline officers reported that American soldiers, though sometimes less seasoned than their German counterparts, displayed confidence and cohesion that could not be ignored. Hitler's inner circle initially dismissed these reports as exaggeration, yet evidence accumulated that America's industrial and human resources made it a formidable opponent. German troops, accustomed to rapid victories and shock tactics, now faced an enemy that absorbed initial attacks and struck back with unrelenting coordination. The psychological effect was profound. What had once been perceived as a peripheral or distant threat now demanded serious strategic recalculation. For the first time, Germany confronted the possibility that a new type of warfare, rooted in scale, endurance, and production, might outmatch even their vaunted operational skill. Moral and psychological angle. Beyond tactics and technology, the American approach introduced a moral dimension that Germany had not fully appreciated. The U.S. mobilization was total. Soldiers, citizens, and industry were united by a sense of purpose. Every factory whistle, every drill command, every convoy moving across the Atlantic reinforced a national will that transcended the battlefield. The Germans, used to coercion and fear as tools of control, encountered a form of motivation grounded in conviction, pride, and unity. This moral energy translated into operational resilience. Units could endure losses, regroup, and strike back, confident that the machine behind them, the U.S. industrial complex, would replenish their ranks and equipment without pause. Soldiers carried not only weapons, but a psychological assurance that failure was temporary and that resources, reinforcements, and support were nearly inexhaustible. For German officers and soldiers alike, this was disorienting. Traditional European warfare often hinged on exhaustion, attrition, and resource scarcity. America, by contrast, seemed limitless. The psychological burden of facing an enemy that never faltered, that continually reinforced itself, weighed heavily on German morale. In battles large and small, this moral and psychological advantage allowed the U.S. to maintain initiative and pressure in ways that were both visible on the battlefield and invisible in the minds of their enemies. Germany's shock at American capacity, combined with the tactical, technological, human, and moral dimensions of U.S. forces, set the stage for the pivotal confrontations of 1942-1943. The moment when Germany would fully understand that America was built different approached rapidly, and it would be defined by specific battles, turning points, and irreversible shifts in momentum. The spring of 1942 marked a critical juncture in the war, a moment when theory met reality and Germany confronted the full scale of America's capacity. In North Africa, the desert became a proving ground, not just of tactics, but of industrial and human endurance. Operation Torch, launched on November 8, 1942, saw over 107,000 Allied troops land in Morocco and Algeria, combining U.S. and British forces in a meticulously coordinated assault. American soldiers disembarked under fire, advancing against Vichy French positions with surprising composure. Their movements, disciplined and flexible, contrasted sharply with German expectations of hesitant, inexperienced troops. The Germans and Italians, defending entrenched positions across the harsh desert landscape, initially underestimated the Americans. Their maps, reports, and intelligence assumed logistical delays and slow troop movements. What they did not anticipate was the speed at which U.S. forces could mobilize, repair vehicles, and coordinate with armored and air support. Sherman tanks, though technically inferior to German panzers in individual engagements, arrived in overwhelming numbers and could be repaired and redeployed quickly, negating Germany's localized technological superiority. Air power amplified the effect. The U.S. Army Air Force's coordinated bombing raids with ground offensives, disrupting supply lines and isolating pockets of resistance. German reconnaissance struggled to keep pace with the tempo of American operations, where German doctrine relied on swift, decisive strikes to destabilize opponents. U.S. forces absorbed initial losses and responded with systematic, relentless pressure. Officers in Berlin began to recognize that sheer American scale, both in manpower and machinery, rendered conventional German strategies less effective. The human cost of this realization was immediate. In Tunisia, German units faced repeated attacks from American infantry, artillery, and mechanized divisions, often simultaneously on multiple fronts. Soldiers reported a morale unlike any encountered in Europe. American troops advanced despite casualties, regrouped after setbacks, and pressed forward with unyielding determination. Letters and diaries from German officers reveal frustration and disbelief. The early arrogance of Hitler's generals gave way to a grudging respect, tinged with the recognition that the war had entered a new phase, one in which America's industrial output and human resilience could no longer be dismissed as secondary. At sea, U.S. naval operations reinforced this lesson. Convoys crossing the Atlantic, protected by destroyers and coordinated with air reconnaissance, delivered men and material in unprecedented volume. German U-boats inflicted losses, but the Americans' logistical depth absorbed these attacks with minimal disruption. Each sunk ship was replaced by another, each convoy reinforced by additional vessels and aircraft. The Germans, conditioned to decisive blows destabilizing supply lines, began to understand a harsh truth. The U.S. war machine was built not for a single, spectacular victory, but for sustained, inexorable pressure. Even leadership decisions reflected this turning point. Eisenhower and his staff coordinated land, sea, and air assets with a precision that contrasted sharply with German command rigidity. While Hitler and Rommel debated the placement of reinforcements, American generals executed operations that anticipated enemy reactions, planned for contingencies, and leveraged their technological advantages. The result was a series of operational successes that cumulatively broke German assumptions. The pivotal moment came in the battle for the Kasserine Pass in February 1943. German and Italian forces initially routed American units, exposing the inexperience of some U.S. divisions. Yet the Americans learned quickly. Reinforcements arrived, tactical adjustments were made, and supply lines maintained. Within weeks, U.S. forces not only stabilized the front, but began counterattacks, leveraging both manpower and material to reclaim lost territory. For German commanders, this was a shock. What had appeared as a vulnerable, inexperienced adversary was capable of rapid adaptation and resilience. The myth of American weakness shattered in the sands of North Africa, and the Germans faced a new reality. They were no longer confronting European armies. They were confronting a nation whose scale, innovation, and resolve could overwhelm even their best strategies. The lessons learned at Kasserine Pass and during Operation Torch would reverberate across multiple theaters. Germany had glimpsed the true magnitude of American power, but the story was far from over. The next phase would reveal the full consequences of underestimating a nation built differently, and the turning point would extend from the deserts of Africa to the skies over Europe and the Pacific. Following the lessons of North Africa, the full weight of American power became undeniable in 1943. In Europe, the strategic bombing campaign against Germany escalated, showcasing the relentless combination of industrial capacity, technology, and human determination. The 8th Air Force, flying from Britain, launched sustained daylight raids against German industrial centers, aircraft factories, and oil refineries. Flying fortresses and B-24 Liberators braved flak and Luftwaffe interception, delivering tonnage of bombs that German defenses struggled to mitigate. Each raid revealed not only the scale of American production, but the human courage underpinning it. Pilots flying repeated missions under near-certain risk, navigators calculating precise routes across hostile skies, crews working in shifts to maintain aircraft readiness. Meanwhile, in the Pacific, U.S. forces confronted the Japanese, but these engagements indirectly affected German calculations. The The U.S. Navy's ability to coordinate complex amphibious operations, sustain long supply lines, and adapt rapidly to enemy tactics signaled to German intelligence that America's operational philosophy was global in scope. Germany's assumptions that America could not effectively project power abroad were crumbling. Reports of American successes in the Solomons, New Guinea, and Guadalcanal filtered back to Berlin, reinforcing the impression of an industrial and logistical colossus capable of simultaneous, multi-theater warfare. In continental Europe, the preparation for Operation Overlord, the D-Day invasion of Normandy in June 1944, further cemented Germany's awakening. Months of training, deception operations, and materiel stockpiling illustrated the methodical, unrelenting American approach. Tanks, artillery, landing craft, and aircraft amassed along the southern coast of England, invisible to German reconnaissance in their preparation, yet overwhelming in eventual execution. By the time the Allies landed on June 6, 1944, Germany faced not just soldiers, but a tide of men, machines, and logistical support, the scale of which it had never experienced. The Normandy landings highlighted multiple facets of the America was built different reality. American units, despite facing entrenched German defenses and fortified positions along the Atlantic Wall, pressed forward with coordinated combined arms tactics. Engineers cleared obstacles under fire. Paratroopers seized key positions behind enemy lines. Artillery and air support moved in synchronization with infantry, creating a momentum that German commanders struggled to counter. Even in moments of severe attrition, the American system ensured that replacements, ammunition, and equipment flowed consistently to the front, sustaining pressure that slowly but inexorably fractured German defenses. The psychological impact on German leadership was profound. Hitler's confidence, once bolstered by rapid victories and tactical ingenuity, waned in the face of an opponent whose advantage was systemic, not merely tactical. Commanders such as Rommel recognized the difference. Whereas German doctrine relied on bold strikes and rapid decisive engagements, the Americans brought patience, endurance, and an industrial-backed resilience that could absorb shock and return stronger. The realization crystallized. Germany could no longer outfight America in conventional terms. The war had become a contest of scale, resources, and sustained execution. At the same time, the human cost underscored the turning point. German soldiers, encountering relentless waves of American infantry and armor, experienced not just defeat in battle, but the psychological strain of facing an adversary whose depth seemed limitless. Reports from the front lines spoke of units exhausted by the continuous pressure, unable to replace losses as rapidly as the Americans could. Morale faltered, and the assumption of European superiority was shattered. By mid-1944, the pattern was unmistakable. Across North Africa, Europe, and the Atlantic, Germany had confronted an adversary whose combination of manpower, industrial capacity, technological innovation, and organizational sophistication created an entirely new kind of war. Kasserine Pass had been the first glimpse. Normandy, and the broader strategic offensive that followed, confirmed it. The day Germany learned America was built different was not a single event, but a series of brutal, cumulative lessons. Lessons that reshaped the course of the war, forcing German commanders to confront a reality they could neither ignore nor reverse. With the turning point established, the aftermath of these confrontations would reveal the consequences: loss, recalibration, and the irreversible momentum gained by the Allied forces. Germany's misjudgment had cost time, resources, and morale, and the world would soon witness the scale of that impact. The consequences of confronting an industrial and human powerhouse like the United States became starkly visible by late 1943. German forces, stretched across multiple theaters, faced mounting losses in personnel, equipment, and morale. In North Africa, the cumulative effect of Operation Torch and subsequent Allied advances led to the surrender of over 250,000 Axis troops in Tunisia by May 1943. German commanders admitted in reports that the American contribution, often underestimated, had been decisive. Tanks, artillery, and sustained infantry assaults overwhelmed defensive positions, while logistical superiority ensured continuous reinforcement. Across the Atlantic, the Battle of the Atlantic highlighted a similar pattern. U-boats had initially threatened Allied shipping lanes, but the sheer scale of American shipbuilding and convoy protection gradually turned the tide. Liberty ships, produced at astonishing rates, replaced losses faster than the Germans could inflict them. Escort carriers and long-range aircraft closed gaps that had allowed U-boat attacks to succeed, and by mid-1943, German submarines were increasingly vulnerable. Commanders in Berlin realized that the United States' industrial depth rendered isolated tactical successes almost irrelevant when faced with continuous, overwhelming output. In Europe, the preparation and execution of strategic bombing campaigns illustrated another dimension of American advantage. By 1943, thousands of heavy bombers, many manufactured in the United States, were operating over Germany. Factories, refineries, and transportation hubs were relentlessly targeted, causing significant disruption to production and morale. Despite the Luftwaffe's efforts, Germany could not keep pace with the loss of infrastructure and materiel. Reports from German industrial leaders noted the unprecedented scale of damage. Entire aircraft production lines were destroyed or diverted, forcing improvisation and slowing operations on multiple fronts. The human toll compounded these material losses. German soldiers, facing relentless pressure, began to experience psychological strain. Replacements were often inexperienced, poorly equipped, or insufficiently trained. The contrast with American forces, fresh, well-supplied, and resilient, exacerbated the disparity. Letters from the front and post-war testimonies reveal frustration, disbelief, and a creeping realization that the American approach was fundamentally different. Unlike previous adversaries, the U.S. was capable of sustaining pressure indefinitely, combining manpower, industry, and morale in a manner Germany could not match. Even within the German high command, the implications were sobering. Hitler and his generals had misjudged the scale and resilience of the United States. Early assumptions that the war in Europe could be concluded before American intervention proved catastrophic. The lessons of North Africa, combined with intelligence reports from Europe and the Atlantic, forced recalculations. Where once German strategy had relied on speed, surprise, and shock, it now confronted a persistent, resource-rich opponent who could absorb setbacks, adapt, and strike back. The Allies, by contrast, gained momentum. Each engagement, whether in North Africa, the Atlantic, or early bombing raids over Europe, reinforced confidence. American troops learned from their encounters, improving tactics, coordination, and efficiency. Industrial production continued unabated, and the psychological message to both soldiers and civilians was clear. The United States was not just participating in the war, it was reshaping it. As 1944 approached, these cumulative lessons and setbacks set the stage for further consequences. Germany faced not only the erosion of its front lines, but a strategic and psychological collapse that would define the final years of the conflict. The aftermath of America's entry into the war would reverberate across battlefields, industries, and minds alike, shaping the outcome of World War II in profound, irreversible ways. By 1944, the full consequences of Germany underestimating the United States had become undeniable. In Europe, the success of D-Day on June 6, 1944, was a decisive demonstration of American military, industrial, and logistical prowess. Over 156,000 Allied troops landed on the beaches of Normandy, supported by more than 5,000 ships and 11,000 aircraft. The Germans, despite fortified defenses along the Atlantic Wall, could not prevent the invasion. Their assumptions about American inexperience and operational inefficiency were shattered. Once ashore, U.S. forces displayed not only tactical discipline, but a remarkable capacity to sustain operations under fire. Every American unit had a network of logistical support, ensuring ammunition, reinforcements, and medical aid reached the front. Sherman tanks and artillery were deployed in waves, quickly repaired, and returned to action. German commanders, many of whom had fought against Europe's finest armies, were stunned by the scale, coordination, and persistence of the American advance. Reports from the front highlighted an enemy that was relentless, resilient, and backed by industrial power Germany could not counter effectively. In the Pacific, similar lessons emerged. The island-hopping campaign, Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Saipan, revealed a United States capable of projecting power across vast distances. Amphibious assaults, coordinated air support, and the rapid buildup of logistics overwhelmed Japanese defenses, signaling to German allies that America's operational philosophy transcended continental constraints. Though Germany was not directly engaged in the Pacific, these campaigns shaped perceptions within the Wehrmacht. The United States' ability to mobilize globally was unlike anything Europe had ever faced. Industrial superiority continued to define the conflict. Factories across the United States produced tanks, aircraft, artillery, and ships at rates Germany could not match. By mid-1944, American war production accounted for approximately one-third of all Allied output globally. Each replacement plane or tank arriving at the front represented not merely a piece of hardware, but the embodiment of an industrial system Germany could not disrupt. The result was a war of attrition heavily skewed in favor of the Allies, where Germany's earlier tactical brilliance could no longer offset systemic disadvantages. Psychologically, these developments eroded German morale. Soldiers confronted waves of American troops and equipment, constantly reinforced and resupplied. Commanders faced the frustration of repeated setbacks, witnessing the futility of traditional tactics against an adversary that could absorb losses and strike back with renewed vigor. Memoirs and post-war analyses reveal a growing awareness that Germany was facing a strategic and industrial juggernaut. The earlier confidence of blitzkrieg victories had given way to desperation, as each failure revealed the limits of German planning against a nation whose scale and resilience seemed limitless. By the end of 1944, Germany's strategic position had deteriorated irreversibly. On the Western Front, American forces advanced steadily through France and into Germany, while on the Eastern Front, the Soviet Union pressed from the east, further stretching German defenses. American contributions, troops, technology, and logistics had become decisive. Hitler's miscalculations about the United States were no longer theoretical. They were painfully tangible in the shattered morale, depleted resources, and faltering command structures of the Wehrmacht. The aftermath of these confrontations underscored a fundamental truth. Germany had underestimated the United States at its peril. From North Africa to Normandy, from the Atlantic to the Pacific, the combination of American industrial might, technological innovation, disciplined troops, and strategic planning reshaped the battlefield. By confronting this reality, Germany learned a lesson it could not unlearn. America was not a conventional adversary. It was a force of scale, endurance, and resilience that had irrevocably altered the trajectory of the war. With these consequences established, the narrative now moves to reflection, examining the broader historical, technological, and human significance of the day Germany learned that America was built different. The day Germany learned America was built different was more than a moment on the battlefield. It was a revelation of scale, resilience, and national character. Across deserts, oceans, and European plains, the confrontation exposed the limitations of assumptions, the fragility of overconfidence, and the power of systemic preparation. Germany had relied on speed, audacity, and tactical brilliance, expecting these qualities to guarantee victory. America, in contrast, relied on endurance, organization, and industrial might, transforming war into a sustained, multidimensional effort. This clash of approaches reshaped not only military outcomes, but the very nature of warfare. The US demonstrated that modern conflict was no longer about isolated genius or daring maneuvers alone. It was about logistics, coordination, technology, and the ability to continually replace losses while maintaining momentum. Each tank produced, each aircraft launched, each soldier trained represented a strategic advantage that multiplied across theaters. Where Germany sought quick, decisive victories, America offered persistence, overwhelming resources, and adaptability. Beyond strategy and machines, there was a human lesson. American soldiers, buoyed by morale, discipline, and a sense of collective purpose, embodied the nation's industrial and technological strength. Germany's initial underestimation highlighted the peril of dismissing human will coupled with systemic capability. Courage and ingenuity, amplified by infrastructure and preparation, proved decisive. In the broader arc of history, the realization that America was built differently reshaped the war's trajectory. Germany's misjudgment accelerated strategic losses, while the Allied forces' ability to project power globally laid the groundwork for the liberation of Europe and the eventual defeat of the Axis. The lesson endures. The outcome of conflict is determined not solely by tactics or technology, but by the alignment of human resolve, industrial capacity, and strategic vision. Ultimately, the story is not just about tanks or planes, victories or defeats. It is about the collision of two worlds, the awakening of one side to the full potential of its opponent, and the enduring truth that preparation, scale, and resilience define the difference between temporary advantage and lasting power. The day Germany learned America was built different was the day the war and the world changed forever.